Nancy Culp, Hollywood's quiet revolutionary and her secret romance with Redd Foxx. She was one of television's most unforgettable faces, tall, sharp-witted, and utterly original. But behind the iconic horn-rimmed glasses and prim skirt suits of Miss Jane Hathaway from the Beverly Hillbillies was a woman far more layered than her prim on-screen persona ever revealed. And among the many secrets Nancy Culp kept close during her extraordinary life was this: she once dated Redd Foxx in secret. Now we know why. Born Nancy Jane Culp on August 28, 1921 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, she grew up far from the glitter of Hollywood. Raised in the quaint town of Mifflintown, then later in Miami-Dade County, Florida, Nancy stood out early, not for fame, but for intellect. She was whip-smart, fiercely curious, and far more interested in words and ideas than makeup and movie magazines. She earned a journalism degree from Florida State College for Women, now Florida State University, and then pursued a master's in English and French at the University of Miami. Her dreams weren't of stardom, but of storytelling, of truth. She began her career writing for a Miami newspaper and eventually worked in the publicity department at MGM Studios, where she caught her first glimpse of the Hollywood machine from behind the scenes. But then, the world changed. In 1944, as war gripped the globe, Nancy Culp made a bold decision. She joined the U.S. Naval Reserve. At a time when few women, let alone future actresses, wore the uniform, Nancy stood tall among her peers, serving with distinction and rising to the rank of lieutenant junior grade. That experience instilled in her a sense of duty, discipline, and deep resolve, traits that would follow her throughout her life, both on and off screen. It wasn't until the early 1950s that Culp stepped in front of the camera. Casting directors were drawn to her unusual combination of comic timing, physical stature, and that unmistakable voice, clipped, refined, and endlessly expressive. She appeared in films like The Model and the Marriage Broker, 1951, Shane, 1953, and A Star is Born, 1954, usually cast as quirky secretaries, nosy neighbors, or eccentric aunts. They were small roles, yes, but she made everyone unforgettable. Then, in 1962, Nancy Culp became a household name. She was cast as Miss Jane Hathaway, the tightly wound, ever-loyal secretary to banker Milburn Drysdale on the smash hit CBS sitcom The Beverly Hillbillies. Culp infused the role with a delicious mix of uptight professionalism and subtle vulnerability, particularly in the unspoken, hopeless affection Miss Hathaway held for the bumbling but endearing Jethro Bodine. With every deadpan glance, every perfectly timed pause, Culp turned what could have been a forgettable sidekick into one of the most beloved characters on television. Her performance earned her an Emmy nomination in 1967 and helped define the golden age of American sitcoms. Her fame exploded. Her face appeared on everything from lunchboxes to comic strips. But behind the scenes, her personal life remained quietly guarded. That same year, she divorced her husband, Charles Malcolm Dacus, after a decade-long marriage. The reasons for their split were never publicly discussed, and Nancy rarely mentioned her marriage at all, not in interviews, not in memoirs. By the time the Beverly Hillbillies launched her into superstardom, she had long since left that chapter behind. And then came the whispers, the quiet stories, a romance with Redd Foxx, the sharp-tongued comic genius behind Sanford and Son, a relationship as unlikely as it was fascinating. While no studio ever acknowledged it, those close to them knew. They met during overlapping appearances and Hollywood functions in the early 70s. And while their personalities were worlds apart, they shared something deeper: outsider status. Culp, a closeted lesbian navigating a male-dominated industry. Foxx, a black comedian who had built his empire despite systemic racism and Hollywood elitism. They understood what it meant to hide in plain sight. Though the relationship was short-lived and never confirmed by either party publicly, those who knew them said it was filled with mutual admiration, fierce privacy, and quiet solidarity. It wasn't a love story built for the press. It was a connection born of empathy. Beyond her work on the Beverly Hillbillies, Nancy Culp's career was as prolific as it was eclectic. She made guest appearances on dozens of hit shows, including Perry Mason, The Bob Cummings Show, Sanford and Son, The Love Boat, and Murphy Brown. She even lent her unmistakable voice to animated television shows. Her range unmatched, her delivery always impeccable. But Nancy Culp wasn't content with fame. In the 1980s, she took yet another unexpected turn. She entered politics. Running as a Democrat in Pennsylvania's 9th Congressional District, she campaigned on platforms of social justice, environmental reform, and education improvement. Her opponent, a popular Republican in a deeply conservative district. She fought a brave race, even after her former co-star Buddy Ebsen publicly endorsed her opponent. She lost the election, but she won something else: respect. And she walked away, as always, with grace. In her later years, Culp returned to academia, teaching drama and acting at Juniata College. She mentored aspiring performers with the same razor-sharp wit and loving precision that had made her a legend. Her students adored her. She demanded excellence but also compassion, and she shared her own journey, the triumphs and the silences, with a kind of wisdom that only comes from having lived it all. Though she never publicly discussed her sexuality, many in the LGBTQ+ community saw her as a quiet hero, a woman who lived on her own terms, loved in silence, and blazed trails without waving flags. Nancy Culp died in 1991 at the age of 69 after a battle with cancer. She passed not with fanfare, but with the same quiet dignity that had defined her life. And now, in the years since, we begin to see the full portrait, not just of Miss Hathaway, but of Nancy. A war veteran, a scholar, a political candidate, an icon, and a woman who lived bravely, even when the world gave her few choices. Her story isn't just a Hollywood biography. It's a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary lives are lived in the background, with courage, intelligence, and a whisper of rebellion. When opposites connect, Nancy Culp and Redd Foxx's hidden bond in a divided Hollywood. The end of Nancy Culp's marriage marked not a retreat, but a rebirth. After quietly stepping away from romantic entanglements, she channeled her energy into work, service, and a life of quiet introspection. By the late 1980s, with her acting career behind her, she transitioned into a phase of profound personal fulfillment, one that unfolded far from cameras, studios, and the curated chaos of Hollywood. She moved first to a rural farm in Connecticut, where the silence of the countryside gave her space to reflect, to write, and to reconnect with the natural world. For someone who had once been a fixture on primetime television, this change of scenery was both symbolic and healing. Gone were the lights, the stage directions, and the pressure to perform. In their place were open skies, animals, students, and purpose. During this time, Nancy began teaching drama and performance. To her students, she was more than a teacher. She was a revelation. Warm, whip-smart, and unafraid to share the unvarnished truth about the industry, she inspired a generation of young actors not with fame, but with authenticity. She taught not just how to act, but how to live with intention. Eventually, she relocated once again, this time to Palm Springs, California, a desert oasis where many retired artists quietly sought peace. But Nancy didn't simply fade into the community, she became part of its heartbeat. She threw herself into philanthropic causes, most notably the Humane Society of the Desert, where she worked to rescue and rehabilitate abused animals. A lifelong lover of creatures great and small, she lent her time, her voice, and her resources to the vulnerable, a reflection of her own empathy and strength. She also became a member of the Desert Theater League, where she mentored young actors, attended local productions, and occasionally returned to the stage herself, not for glory, but for love of the craft. In Palm Springs, she wasn't Miss Hathaway. She was Nancy, the woman who knew how to light up a scene, a classroom, or a community fundraiser with the same ease. Her advocacy didn't stop at animals or the arts. Nancy was also deeply committed to social causes, especially her work with United Cerebral Palsy, where she organized fundraisers, volunteered at events, and helped promote awareness for individuals living with physical and developmental disabilities. Hers was a voice not just for entertainment, but for compassion, inclusion, and quiet resilience. And yet, for all her public service and gentle mentorship, there remained a chapter of Nancy's life known only to a few, a chapter that was as surprising as it was moving. It was a chapter that, for decades, defied Hollywood's expectations, a connection between Nancy Culp and Redd Foxx. To the outside world, the two stars couldn't have been more different. Nancy Culp, the poised, Ivy League-minded Navy veteran turned sitcom darling, best known for playing the tightly wound, ever-loyal Jane Hathaway. Redd Foxx, the rough-cut, lightning-fast stand-up king, infamous for his raunchy party records, and later beloved as Fred Sanford, the street-smart junkman in Sanford and Son. She was white, private, intellectual. He was black, explosive, unapologetically raw. She came from academia and served in uniform. He rose from the Chitlin circuit and turned pain into punchlines. But in a city built on facades, their differences became their common ground. They met, according to friends, in the early 1970s, likely during overlapping tapings or industry events. Neither star was known for chasing the social circuit, but in each other they found a mutual refuge. The connection wasn't rooted in career moves or publicity schemes. It was quiet, personal, real. Their relationship, rumored, whispered, but never publicly acknowledged, became a sanctuary. While they moved in separate professional circles, both understood the cost of performance beyond the stage. Redd, as a black man who had spent years battling racial caricatures. Nancy, as a woman quietly grappling with a private identity the public was never allowed to see. Some insiders described their relationship as romantic. Others called it emotional. Some said it was a friendship so close, it defied categorization altogether. What's certain is this: the bond was deep, enduring, and fiercely protected. They would meet away from industry eyes, sometimes in Palm Springs, sometimes in quiet corners of Los Angeles. There were dinners full of laughter, conversations that dug beneath the surface, and shared stories about the absurdity of being public property in a world that understood neither of them. Nancy appreciated Redd's unfiltered brilliance, his ability to strip down truth with one sentence, to challenge an audience even as he made them roar with laughter. And Redd, for his part, admired Nancy's intelligence, integrity, and quiet defiance of Hollywood's mold. In many ways, they were two revolutionaries in disguise. Nancy Culp never felt the need to make grand declarations about her personal life. She understood the world she lived in, a world that offered roles but not truth, applause but not permission. Redd Foxx, for all his crudeness on stage, was a man of remarkable depth, humor, and insight, and he saw in Nancy something few others did: a fellow traveler, a kindred soul. Their story, kept in the shadows for decades, reminds us that human connection rarely fits neatly into categories. It transcends expectation, reputation, even time. And in Nancy Culp and Redd Foxx, we find a bond that defied the rules of Hollywood and quietly redefined what love, loyalty, and understanding could truly look like. In her later years, as the desert winds whispered through Palm Springs, Nancy Culp lived a life of grace, privacy, and quiet rebellion. She never wrote a tell-all, never sought the spotlight again, but through her students, her advocacy, and the stories finally being told, her full humanity is at last being seen. She was not just Miss Hathaway. She was not just a sitcom sidekick. She was a trailblazer, a warrior, a woman who loved freely, served fiercely, and gave more than she ever asked to receive. A bond beyond appearances. When Nancy Culp met Redd Foxx. When Redd Foxx made the leap to television with Sanford and Son in the early 1970s, he brought with him the full force of his fearless comedic persona. His delivery was brash, his wit razor-sharp, and his style unmistakable. Streetwise, swaggering, and unfiltered. He was unlike anything American audiences had ever seen in a sitcom lead. Nancy Culp, by contrast, was measured, methodical, and composed. Her humor was dry, her performances nuanced, her public image a buttoned-up intellectual from another world entirely. So how did two personalities this different, almost opposite, find each other? According to close friends and insiders, the connection between Nancy Culp and Redd Foxx defied every Hollywood trope. Their relationship began in the late 1960s, reportedly sparked during a charity event in Los Angeles, an evening meant to raise funds, but one that ended up creating something rare and deeply personal. At the time, both were riding waves of success. Culp had solidified her place in pop culture history as Miss Jane Hathaway on the Beverly Hillbillies. Fox, meanwhile, was revolutionizing television comedy, bringing unapologetic black working-class humor into millions of homes across America. But beneath the surface, they were both wrestling with the isolations of fame, the contradictions of identity, and the quiet need to connect beyond what the world expected of them. Their bond thrived in silence, unmarked by fame. Despite divergent public images, they shared a deep intellectual and emotional connection, engaging in discussions about politics, race, and identity. Their relationship, rooted in mutual respect and companionship, was not defined as romance or friendship, but was genuine and enduring, untouched by societal expectations and misunderstandings. As the 1990s began, Nancy Culp faced health decline due to cancer, retreating from public life but remaining active in her community. She passed on February 3, 1991, age 69, leaving a legacy as a Navy veteran, teacher, and advocate who inspired many through her strength and authenticity.